Welcome to Conversations with Aunt Elizabeth, the podcast inspired by my book, I'm a Registered Dietitian, Now What?, where I have the absolute joy to sit back, relax, and have a conversation about nutrition with a variety of people who share their personal story of passion and purpose, especially registered dietitians. Today's conversation is with Lucas Sjostrom, a farmer and passionate professional working for Minnesota dairy farmers. Don't forget about my birthday book giveaway. I will be giving 4 I'm a Registered Dietitian Now What? Books away, one for each week of my birth month, because I actually love to give gifts to others on my birthday. I know that sounds weird, but I'd much rather give you a gift than get a gift. Go to my website, AuntElizabethRD.com, and register in the pop-up. Winners will be announced in my personal podcast at the end of the month. Since we are talking dairy today, I have to share my current thing of love, that is gnarly pepper custom dip blends. With flavors like veggie and onion, which is actually my favorite, it mixes with any brand of non-fat plain Greek yogurt or full fat, whatever you like, and you can get them in large bags or individual tear packets that are perfect for the individual yogurt cup. I take them to work with me all the time. Head on over to gnarlypepper.com, gnarly, G-N-A-R-L-Y, pepper, P-E-P-P-E-R.com to learn more. Last September, I was fortunate enough to attend a Registered Dietitian Farm Tour Summit, which was hosted by Midwest Dairy and the National Pork Board, and it was held in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I was very excited because I had the opportunity to tour both a dairy farm and a pork farm to learn more about farming practices in the Midwest. Part of the tour took me to Sjostrom's Farms, a dairy farm in Lafayette, Minnesota, where I met Steve and his son, Lucas. Not only is Lucas a brother, he's a son, a husband, a father, a part-time farmer, the industry relations director for Midwest Dairy, the executive director of the Minnesota Milk Producers Association, and last but not least, a tour guide at Redhead Creamery, which his wife is the president and CEO. Please sit back and enjoy my interesting conversation with Lucas. Well, I'm so excited that you're taking some time with me today and just kind of telling me about you and how you got interested in being a farmer yourself, and then also your work with Midwest Dairy. So let's go back to when you were younger and you were kind of deciding what you were going to be when you grew up. How did you get to wanting to be a farmer?
Right. I guess backing up, it came to me pretty late, in high school at least. But it all boils down to my grandma. And in high school, I really, I went to a small high school and got to do everything. So sports, band, choir, science fair. My goal as especially a junior and senior was to have as many excused absences as possible. And my principal joked that I set the record, my senior year. And I probably came pretty close. Who knows if the record's true, but between FFA and 4-H and lots of things, I got lots of diverse experiences and got to see a lot of things that a lot of people don't see for their whole career. One example, I mean, it seemed really minimal at the time, but I was president of my county 4-H Federation, which might sound prestigious, but just consider I ran unopposed, and there were 4 officers for 4 positions, and we ran and we got those positions. However, because I was president at the time that our county extension educator quit and we had to hire a new one, I was on the hiring committee in 10th grade. And, a lot of my friends now in their 30s still haven't been on hiring committees, depending on the positions they've had. So got to see lots of things and do lots of things connected with agriculture. But I really, really loved biology and was going to major in biology with goal of becoming a veterinarian. After my experience in some biology classes in high school, I just thought, I love animals and I like this farm stuff, so I'm definitely going to be a veterinarian. And I was looking at lots and lots of schools in Minnesota, probably about 12. And then I was milking cows with my grandma. So I grew up on a dairy farm. I should back up. Grew up on a dairy farm in southern Minnesota, and currently 3 generations of my family still work together. My grandparents, my dad, and my brother all work together. keeping it going and doing everything that needs to be done, which, as you can guess, is a 365-day-a-year job. But I was milking with my grandma, and she said, well, Lucas, if you go anywhere besides the University of Minnesota, you realize you're going to lose all your 4-H and FFA friends, because that's our land grant. Like Iowa State is a land grant, so it would be the place to go if you want to major in animal science or agronomy or something agricultural in Minnesota. And when that hit me, it's kind of a big thing when you're 18 years old, and the idea that you could at least retain some friends when going to this campus of 60,000 people.
Yeah.
Starting anew, even with a campus of, 1 to 4,000 people, some of the other smaller schools I looked at, it was a pretty simple choice. And then the first semester of college happened, and let's just say through chemistry class, I decided that, or the university more so decided that I shouldn't be a veterinarian anymore. So that was fine. I met my wife by failing the first class, because she did that as well, and knew I had to switch careers. And my parents had always been kind of involved in organizations and not really involved politically, but at least involved in their farm organizations. And that led me to some opportunities to do an internship in Washington, D.C. my sophomore year. And from there, I just realized I was in the House Agriculture Committee for 6 months, literally answering phones, making appointments, doing scheduling, attending briefings and writing summaries, but looked around, and everybody else on the Agriculture Committee was an intern as well, but they were really hoping to go into education, but unfortunately they had to settle for the Agriculture Committee, or really hoping to go into Veterans Affairs, but they had to settle for the Agriculture Committee, or really hoping to go in something else besides agriculture, but they got stuck, in their words, on the Agriculture Committee. And looking around, I realized, oh man, farmers and farm kids don't like doing this stuff. And so that led me to a career in the policy realm, working for farmers and also being a farmer at the same time. My wife and I now live on a second generation farm, but her family as well has been farmers for many, many generations. And she's got a small cheese plant, and we have a dairy farm. And because of my job working for farmers, I don't get as much time to do that as sometimes I would like. At 4 a.m., sometimes it's nice to have the break. But so I get to work for all the dairy farmers in Minnesota for Midwest Dairy, and we help them increase knowledge and increase visibility of their product, which is, of course, milk and all the many, many things that come from it. So that's a 30,000-foot overview of me, Anne. Hopefully not too much or too little, but hopefully that makes sense.
So how is it? Because you're kind of, like you said, you're kind of from the perspective of, I come from a farming family, but then I also help promote other farms. And when you're going out and spreading the message about dairy foods, what kind of activities do you do throughout the year?
Right. So we have a moderate-sized company, actually, because we team up with a number of other states. I believe you're calling me from Iowa today, so
yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was another one of our states calling us from the Midwest, or as part of the Midwest Dairy family. So basically, we stretch from North Dakota and Minnesota all the way down to Illinois, Arkansas, and part of Oklahoma. And all the farmers in those states are represented by about several dozen staff members. And we do a few things in big buckets. And one of them is my job. Like I said, I kind of take the farmers' opinions and feedback on what we're doing in every other program, and kind of am relaying things back and forth, telling farmers, hey, here's what we're doing. What do you think of that? And then taking that feedback back out to my other teammates and saying, here's what the farmers think of this. My teammates will do things like help educate kids in schools on dairy and agriculture more widely, help dietitians like those who are probably listening to this podcast, and yourself. Anne and I met when we did a tour of some farms, and it was just great to show you guys around and just, really giving people a taste of what farming is like today and what farmers do, and more importantly, why they do it. And then also the other kind of big bucket that we work on is research. So we work with the land grant universities especially, but also some private entities to create new dairy products or make changes to processing to improve all dairy products. And that's our smallest team. There's just 2 or 3 people working on that at Midwest Dairy. And then the rest of the staff is kind of split, either farmer focused or school and nutritionist focused. But again, our activities would be something like at the Minnesota and Iowa state fairs. We sell dairy products, great tasting dairy products, and that there is potential to make money there. But also, we just want to make sure people are tasting the best dairy products they can taste. So we source only the finest quality everything. In schools, one of our most popular programs that touches schools around the nation is the Fuel Up to Play 60 program that is funded by dairy farmers along with other people, other companies and individuals who've contributed in kind and financial donations. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud about working for dairy farmers, because we're so selfless a lot of times, or I feel like my bosses are, all 8,000 of them in the region. We are basically trying to teach kids how to eat well and be active. And it stops there. And there's maybe a farm tour or a little dairy education. But the most important thing we're trying to do is we realize selfishly that if we have people who are living a good life, getting a great education and eating well, that's probably going to turn out to be good customers in the very long term for us. So we put aside immediate benefit for dairy farmers, and we say, let's just give kids a great start, make sure those who aren't eating get something to eat, and make sure those who do have something to eat know their choices and know why the plate looks like it should, and what the diversity should look like. So that's the high level overview of some of the things we do, but I'm happy to go into other activities as well.
What's your favorite activity? What's one thing that you really enjoy doing?
So we are about to hit a marathon here in January and February, and then I think there's one more in March. We have 22 districts in Minnesota, and so we will be doing 22 meetings with those districts, kind of as our annual report. So we get to kind of share. We operate in farmers are really, really busy. So we operate on a strategic plan that lasts for usually around 3 years, and farmers, just with the businesses they're managing back home, they can't be involved in every decision. So the staff are really in charge of making good decisions for the dairy farmers. And at that event, we get to do the things that are basically my job: report out on the results of our activities and ask the farmers for what they're doing. And a lot of times we get to hand out fun stuff. Some of the stuff we've worked on that we've either given to kids or other people like yourself throughout the year, and the farmers get the taste of what we've been doing. So that's probably my most fun event of the year, just seeing the farmers from throughout Minnesota. And those meetings go on in all the other states as well.
Let's just talk a little bit more about the farmers that you serve. Like you said, you have 8,000 bosses, basically. So tell me how that works with your company. When you say that they're your boss, how are they your boss?
Right. So all the farmers in these states and across the nation actually pay in to Midwest Dairy to support whatever our efforts are, and our support from the law that created this assessment that dairy farmers wanted back when prices were really, really low in the 80s, was to build sales and trust of dairy products. And so every single farmer pays in to what we call checkoff, and that supports our efforts. We have regional institutions like Midwest Dairy Association that I mentioned before is in 9.5 states. And then we also have Dairy Management, Inc., which is based in Chicago and kind of runs our more national efforts and pulls us all together. So every dairy farmer in the country is united in this in some way. And we're all trying to pull together because, especially with milk, I think, especially with fluid milk, I mean, it's a item that for a long time people have just been wondering information about. And I think as time goes on, that has spilled over into our cheese and yogurt, and will continue to be looked to for other dairy products. Just, how is this stuff made? Milk being usually 48 hours or at the most a week from source to store. I think a lot of people are just like, wow, I'm consuming something that was made that fast, and people want to know the story. And I think, like I said, over time with cheese and yogurt and ice cream, people are going to want to know more of what's in this. And that's a really fun and easy story to tell in dairy, because like fluid milk, there's one ingredient. There's milk, and then there's maybe some fortified vitamins that are required by law. And so that makes our job really fun and easy to tell people, hey, this is a clean label, an easy, fresh choice, and it probably came from a relatively local dairy farmer.
And I like that, how you mentioned about serving your dairy farmers, because they don't have time, because they're working so much to produce the product. You're kind of like that in-between person to help the consumer hear the story about what the farmers are doing.
Right. And my job is also to give farmers the tools to do that, because even though I play a farmer part-time, our farmers are the experts. Every farm's different. So, out of those 8,000 farms I mentioned, we've got the biggest and the smallest, every kind of operation you can imagine. And we're all pulling in the same way. So we're actually happy to celebrate our differences. And it's really fun when we get in classrooms or in front of groups, if we can bring in two very different farmers, 6 months or a year apart, because people that have never been to a farm before, or never talked to a farmer before, maybe talk to the first one and just assume all farmers are this way and they do it like this. But from Arkansas to the tip of North Dakota and Minnesota, there are very different soils, very different climates, even different cows that are bred for from time to time. And that leads farmers to manage things in very different ways, all of which I think are great. And they sell to different people, or some make their own products like ourselves. So they've got different needs for whatever they're going for. And that's just the biggest thing I always want people to know is I can introduce you to a farm, like we got to tour earlier this summer, or a farmer, but this is one single way of doing it. And nobody is better or worse. People all started in a different spot and are all always trying to improve.
And they're always making a great product. Like, I think a lot of people are always concerned about production and, animal safety and that type of stuff. But no matter what, every farmer is doing exactly what they need to do to produce a great product that's safe for consumers.
Right. And I think, not that any product on the shelf is bad per se, but there's just so many controls in the milk industry. Our milk is usually tested 7 to 10 times between the time it leaves the farm and when it arrives to the store. And with the 100 plus years of science we have in knowing all the components of milk and how it's produced, we thankfully, have figured out a lot of stuff. A lot of people will look back to the good old days of whatever kind of food they want. But milk, if you read the reports in the early 1900s, we have come a long way. Departments of Agriculture didn't say the milk was bad in the early 1900s. They said it was, terrible. There's a lot of things that happened to people 100 years ago that we thought was just people getting sick, but it's from our foods having much higher standards, all foods. And because we know so much about milk, because it's so easy to test, we've really got, like you said, a really safe product that I feel really confident in, and our farmers, will go to the store and buy it just like everybody else. So, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a real, like I said, my job is really fun and easy at times because we do have a great thing that we put on the table for people.
Does cold weather affect milk production? Does it affect the calves? I know that you guys take care of your calves, but how does cold weather affect the cattle?
Yeah, really, really minimally, and you will see a loss in milk production, and we always say that milk production is the absence of stress. So if you take stress away, cows will give more milk. Now, negative 25 is not ideal for a cow, but it's not bad either. It's probably like us being in that 80-degree humid day. You're not really going to complain about it, but 74 with a little breeze would probably be a little better. It's kind of like that for cows. So their milk production isn't going to be at the highest possible. They love it at 50 degrees with no wind or 60 degrees with no wind. But really below 40 negative would be a bad temperature, 40 below zero. So as long as they're above that and we didn't have too much wind, it's not a big deal. And we say that, and I think we say that on the tours on our farm sometimes, or I'll get into a conversation with people and they're like, oh, those poor cows. But decades ago, we used to move our calves inside thinking that, like human babies, they wanted to be warm all winter. But it had worse effects, I should say. They would get pneumonia, and there just wasn't enough airflow, and they just don't need it that warm. So we and many other dairies like growing our calves in the cold. There's not many bacteria that like to survive in that cold, so it's really, really great for calves. And our worst months are actually July and August is when calves can get sick because the heat and the humidity are much harder on them. But I had the opportunity. Yeah, it's crazy. And you think about it like, oh, is he just, saying the cows are okay because they're still walking around, but they're shuddering. I'm at home today now looking out my window, and the cows are just relaxing and eating and looking just like they would most other days. And I got the opportunity to travel to Russia for a previous job, and there are several breeds of domestic Russian cattle that have been there forever, even in Siberia. So I think that kind of proves that cattle can and are meant to live in cold weather, because those cows they'll hide in the trees sometimes if it's really, really windy and way, way, way below zero, but those cows have not much trouble at all. We do close up our barn to keep it as warm as possible during the summertime. We'll have the curtains down and have it totally open-sided. During the winter, we'll have those closed up. And a cow is pretty similar to a human. They're about 101 body temperature. So when you have 200 of those in a barn, they get it warm enough that we don't even need a cover in the middle of our barn. That little section running down the middle of our barn's open. So if it's snowing, there's enough heat generated by the cows that they will evaporate the snow before it even comes down, even though it's still cold in the barn. It's just warm enough to melt snow. So that's just an example that, the cows are just fine. They'd maybe lose a couple pounds of milk production because they'd rather have it be 30, 40, 50, 60 degrees. But they're way better than when it's 90 or 100 degrees.
That's interesting, because I think, as dietitians and other people that, hear about treatment of animals and that type of stuff, that they would say, oh, look at those poor cows out there. It's freezing and it's so cold, but that's actually so much better for their health. And I think that's a great message to tell my listeners, because, hey, cows like it a little bit cooler than they like it hotter. So that's good to know.
Yeah, and wind and moisture are going to be the only things that change it. So if you don't have shelter for them from above, and if it's really, really windy and you don't have shelter for them from the side, and they're wet and it's windy, that's when they can get chapped skin and be really cold. But generally speaking, farmers in this climate have to and do prepare for that for milking cows. But if the cows weren't milking, you would probably need even less than that to keep them warm and safe and dry.
Well, and kind of along those lines of just cows and kind of treatment, I know that you probably get a lot of questions, and I know I get questions because I work in a retail environment, just about milk in general and how safe milk is. Just the other day, I had a customer call me and ask me if there was pus in milk. So I think that there's lots of questions out there. And what are some common questions that you might get, or dairy farmers might get, that are misconceptions, kind of like cows being cold?
Sure. Well, I think, Anne, the one you just asked is one that comes up once in a while, because some of the people in the world who don't think we should be, working with animals and utilizing animals, spread that message quite a bit. And I I guess I could say it's one of those fictitious things that's been taken. It's taken something way, way, way out of context. When you drink milk, just like any mammal drinks milk, it's mostly milk, and then there's other stuff in there. There's generally speaking, there is white blood cells that fight disease, and this is true with humans and camels and cows and everybody else. And the higher the level of the white blood cells that are fighting disease to keep the milk clean, the more stress that animal or individual or mammal has. And so our people, the people who are against us, have taken that there's all these other things in milk that are disgusting because they're not milk, so it must be pus because it's the same stuff that's in an infection because it's a white blood cell. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's no simple answer because that stuff's naturally there and should be there, but it's stuff that's made to keep the milk safe and keep the animal healthy. So we do, and we are paid on dairy farms for the level of those white blood cells, which is called somatic cell count. Somatic means non-sex cell, and milk is a sex cell since it's a reproductive liquid, of course. And so farmers are paid for that and pay really close attention to that. And it's kind of interesting, over the past 30 years, our farmers have gotten so good at having quality, safe, just great tasting milk. And it does taste better, and it makes more cheese per pound, and it makes more butter per pound, and it makes better ice cream per pound. The lower you have these levels, that the federal government and farmers voluntarily have ratcheted down what's okay, what's good to send. And there's billions and billions and billions of cells in milk, but the appropriate level has come down significantly because our practices in the parlor are better. We're better at cooling our milk faster, and having milk trucks come pick up our milk faster just keeps that product really, really high quality. So we're able to strengthen our standards along the way. But so that hopefully addresses that one. I mean, it's just a fictitious pulling along of taking a word out of context and calling it something that it's not.
And I agree with you. And that's why I think it's good that you address that, because, to address it also that it is also found in human milk as well, that they don't think of that as being a similar type of reproductive sex kind of fluid. So I'm glad that you kind of cleared that up for me, because, that's something that I think a lot of dietitians and a lot of nutrition professionals get questions about, that we need, your input and the farmer's input to understand it better, to relay that message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I think probably the next most frequent question, at least for people who walk around our farm, are, where are the guys? Where are the bulls? And we have bull calves on our farm for a couple of weeks. And my dad, I live on my parents-in-law farm, and I grew up on a dairy farm in southern Minnesota, which Ann and others were able to tour. My dad comes every 2 weeks and picks them up, all the males, all the young bull calves, and they all get raised together as steers for the beef market. And so they live about 18 months to 2 years of age, depending on what the market's doing, all together on a diet formulated by our nutritionist down by him, where there's more space for manure and more space for corn. I live up in dairy country, and so it's very expensive to raise bulls here because there's so many dairy cows everywhere that it just makes more sense to focus on the ladies. And the reason that we don't keep the bulls here is two reasons. First, we've got 150 or nearly 150 years of breeding and pedigrees, watching the ancestry of all these cows, cataloged in our different breed associations. So the Holstein Association is the one that we adhere to because we have Holsteins, the black and white cows. And so we can trace back to essentially the beginning of America, every single dad and mom of our cows, back to at least 1885, if not before. And I think that's something that's amazing. Yeah, that's something that just shocks people. I think most people have a hard time figuring out who their great-great-grandparents and beyond are. And cows have a calf every 2 years, or at least a new generation begins every 2 years, and then a cow will have a calf every year after that, most likely. So when you're talking 150 years, there's close to 100 probably at least generations back in many of these animals that you could find if you wanted to. And
that's impressive.
USDA, yeah, it's a big collaboration, and the way it works is farmers voluntarily test their cows once a month. They pay for it. It helps them decide on what to do with their cows through a program called the Dairy Herd Improvement Association. And so we have a milk tester come once a month, and they've done all the statistics to figure out. They ask us questions like, when did you last milk? Sometimes you're running late or you're a little early for whatever reason. Maybe you have to go to a basketball game that night, or maybe something broke in the morning, so you got started a little late or something like that. So even if you're 30 minutes or an hour off, they've done to the statistics so that you can figure out, based on what your cow gives today, the likelihood that she's going to make X amount per year. And if you're milking 2 times or 3 times per day, they figure that out. And that way, are your cows average, above average, or below average? And you can determine that with every single cow. It also determines fat and protein and the quality, like we talked about before. Then all of those statistics are put together by USDA and our dairy farmer-owned organizations like DHIA, which is the Dairy Herd Improvement Association I just mentioned. And basically, with a bunch of algorithms and weighting and scoring, we figure out which bulls are the best. And bulls are very dangerous. Almost every year, I'll see a story or multiple stories of some farmer somewhere getting killed by bulls. And some farmers do still use bulls, but they need to be very, very careful in using it because they can get really aggressive. But most farmers, over 80%, use bulls from a genetics company. And so those genetics companies house the bulls together and have special management and very high-class facilities for these bulls to stay clean and protected and keep humans safe. And as we have the first 100 or 200 daughters around the country from any given bull, we'll be able to know, hey, this is the best bull in the country. And then the genetics companies make their prices for the bulls based off that. And in our region of the country, you want, generally speaking, high fat and high protein, because that's what makes the cheese, which is the biggest use for milk up in this area, but also is just the value of the components that goes into things like baby formula or the fluid milk that you see at the store or butter. And so people breed for different reasons. Another example is in Florida, they don't have much use for cheese because there's so many people and there's so little milk because it's harder to grow cows down there. So they're not paid for protein. They're only paid for butter fat, and you don't need as much protein for fluid milk. So the people down there would breed their animals for totally different reasons because they're paid for different things. So that's probably the second question, and I know I've rattled on a lot, and I could go on all day about bulls and genetics and the amazing system we've built for the past 150 years, figuring out which bulls are best and then breeding our animals to them, and then also by exporting our bulls, making sure that we're not inbreeding our animals, which would happen, of course, if you left them all on the same farm. And it's really, first of all, it's the reason why we use cows. Cows are easier to breed than most mammals. They have a 18-hour window where you can breed them, and the genetic progress has been tracked for so long that we really truly know of all the bulls tested who's the best bull in the world right now. And I shouldn't just say the country, the world. And then who's the worst bull in the world, and then you can assign values as such.
That's something we didn't even talk about that when I came to visit. So that's very interesting that, there is so much research and so much dedicated to finding the healthiest animals to do breeding.
Yeah. And you mentioned health, and we've come so far. So you would expect, or scientists expect, about 50% of an animal's life is going to be based on its genetics. and 50% is going to be based on how you manage that animal, or in other words, trying to keep it as stress-free as possible. And we've done an amazing job on management over the past 50 years, just figured out what cow comfort really means, figured out what a lack of stress really means. Like I mentioned already, we thought, well, the smart thing to do is put calves in warm barns during the winter, but actually, no, we figured out the worst thing to do. So we figured out really well how to manage cattle for our different climates around the country. And we figured out how to make milk. We improve about 2% every year. But health is probably the number one thing farmers are focusing on now, since we figured out those other two. And so keeping cows free of disease, there's indexes and algorithms and rankings now that even if you, the best bull in the country usually is based a lot on fat and protein. But now a lot of farmers think, hey, I want a healthier herd, so I'll sacrifice a little fat and protein and milk in exchange for keeping my cows healthier. That means less veterinary visits. That means less use of medicine. And that means just trouble-free cows from beginning of life to end.
That's impressive. And that's good for people to know that most farmers, almost all farmers, are striving to make sure they have the healthiest animal they possibly can on their farm.
Yeah, and those are, it makes sense if you think about it from a genetics aspect. What can you measure really easily? You can measure how tall a cow is. You can measure how wide a cow is. You can measure how deep her udder is, which is really, really important, believe it or not. And so we have, in addition to the milk testing, which is also easier to measure, we have about 12% of the country is enrolled in classifying. So the classifier comes out and rates the cows. You want to rate your best cows and your worst cows, and that also rolls into those genetics. But what's really, really hard to measure when you just walk up and look at a cow is she going to be healthy her whole life? So it's taken decades and decades of collecting this data to say these cows are more likely to have pneumonia, or these cows are more likely to be born with a genetic defect. So it makes sense that it's kind of the last hill to conquer, but I think we're finding more and more it's probably also the most important one. You just usually can't see it with your eyes.
Sure. And you mentioned too about keeping your cows comfortable and keeping your cows stress-free. So what kind of things are being done to make sure that happens for the cows?
Well, every farm is different in this category, and it depends on climate and what facilities you have. So, and when you came to my parents' farm, they have mattresses, and then they bed on top of the mattresses with straw. And that's one great way to do it. But my dad's barn was built back in the 70s, and that was at the time that we thought that we needed to keep cows a lot warmer than we do. So there we have a lot more fans per stall, because we built the barn to be pretty warm. So we need to keep a lot more air moving during the summer months, so that those cows are cool enough, staying at that 40 to 50 to 60 degree level. Whereas here on the farm where I live, our barn was built in 2002, so we had learned a lot more about cow management by then, and our barn was built to house those cows on sand. And sand is probably some people might argue, but I think most dairy farmers would agree, sand is probably the best bedding for cows, unless you have a perfect pasture that never gets too wet and never gets too dry, but of course, that only lasts for so long. But sand is what we use here, and the bad side of sand is how hard it wears on equipment. It grinds on everything. All of our equipment and all of our stuff that we use to manage the cow's manure, manage the really everything. It's just an extra grittiness. Like, imagine if you had sandpaper on your hands 24 hours a day. That's what having sand in our barn is like. Everything just wears out a little faster. So there's trade-offs, and some farmers use straw, and so depending on what the farmer wants, I think everybody can figure out how to make their cows most comfortable, but based on their facility and based on how they want to manage their cows, everybody's different.
And like you said, temperature is different, and also where you're located and how to make sure the air stays cool and make sure it stays comfortable for the cows. Because Florida, I'm sure, is much different than Minnesota.
Oh yeah, and the newest barns in Minnesota, a lot of the newest and biggest barns in Minnesota are controlling that climate a lot more, and so it's a little more expensive because they have cross ventilated barns, so they've got fans running almost year round, probably not this time of year, but almost year round, to keep the air moving at a nice steady 5 to 8 mile an hour breeze. And when it's negative 20 outside, it's probably going to be negative 5 in there. But when it's negative, or when it's positive 100 outside, it's probably going to be 85 or 90 in there. So they get a lot of benefits keeping those cows out of the worst stress scenarios. But it's also a big liability because you have extra fans. But for the cows, you are getting rid of the most extreme temperatures, which of course, the most extreme temperatures are the ones we worried about. And in Florida, they've had that system for quite some time. And rather than the system I just told you where everything's closed up, they'll have one end of the barn open and lots of sprinklers and lots more fans. And they do what's called tunnel ventilated barns and just keep those cows as wet as possible and keep the air moving at much, much higher speeds to keep them feeling like they're on the beach, even though they're about 100 miles away from it, and it's definitely not a beach all the time. But yeah, everybody has different scenarios that they're dealing with, and I feel farmers do a really good job making the best of those scenarios.
Sure. And I think that it's always great to see farmers and how much you guys care about your animals. I mean, you truly love and care for your animals like they are your family. And I think that's just seeing you and your family and your element on your farm, how much you guys care for your animals.
Well, thank you. I mean, they are part of us. They are, let's not mistake, they are our livelihood. So if we don't take care of them, they're not going to take care of us. And so I think every farmer knows that and understands that. And that mantra has been around for those 150 years that the better you take care of the cows, the better they're going to take care of you and your family. So it just makes sense to live symbiotically. They're not seen as only an asset that you're trying to get the most out of. The cow production system is just really amazing that all we need to do is eliminate stress. Now, it's really, really hard to do that. But if all we could do is eliminate all of her stress, we're going to be better off financially, and that cow's going to be better off health-wise.
That's that. And it's kind of like people. If we would eliminate our stress, think of how better our lives would be.
Right. Well, and when you eliminate cow stress, of course, you're eliminating your own stress, because if your cows are stressed out, you as a farmer are also stressed out. So it's good for our people and our communities too, to not have angry farmers running around.
Yeah, I'm sure that's very true. When you talked about just like how different cows in different areas of the world produce milk for different purposes, maybe talk about, like you said, in the Midwest, you kind of do milk mostly for cheese, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about 2/3 of our milk goes for cheese.
Okay. So like when you're, just for my understanding, when you feed your cows, I'm sure you work with a nutritionist for your cows. What you feed them, does that determine the proper protein, fat, whatever that cow produces to make cheese and provide the milk for cheese?
Yeah, again, that's part of that 50% management and 50% genetics thing. So a huge, huge, huge factor in how much protein, how much fat, how much other solids she will have in her milk. So again, milk is 87% water most of the time. And the other 13%, the components of that, or if you can increase that 13 to say 14, that is a huge difference in what the cow is providing in terms of efficiency in like a cheese plant, and of course the farmer and the plant's bottom line. So the genetics plays a huge role. On our farm here, we have Holsteins, and they typically give a little more milk than other breeds, but they also have a little less protein and solids as a percentage. But we're not paid for percentages, of course. We're paid for pounds. So the more pounds that our cows put out, the better. Other people prefer Jerseys. They would have a higher percentage of fat and protein, but give a little less milk. But each cow is different. Each herd is different. In other parts of the world, they have a different market. So wherever you're sending it to, you might be feeding slightly different, but you also have different feed available. So down in Florida, I've been to a herd that strictly grazes and then gives some grain in the parlor. And then I've been to herds that are much like ours, but they probably don't grow the same types of feed, but we grow, and most farms across the country grow feeds to be mixed in one meal. We call it a total mixed ration. Imagine every single day your breakfast, dinner, and supper being put into a food processor and chopped up so the pieces are the exact same and also taste good. That's the goal of our partnership between our nutritionist, our veterinarian, and our feeder, who are usually on farms my size, also just the farmer. And we want every single bite to be the exact same, because cows are pretty smart and they'll sort it out if they can figure out that, ooh, that tastes good. But just like humans, usually what tastes good. Yeah, usually what tastes good isn't what's best for them. So we have to have a mixture, but the wetness of the feed and the smell of the feed does matter.
They are smart cookies then, if they can pick out what they like.
Oh, and you know, that's one of the things that, so I've got a toddler at home, and you know, if she's deciding not to eat what we put in front of her for a couple of days, you can usually tell that, hey, you know, we're not offering you anything besides apples for the next 3 days, because you need to eat the good stuff. And for cows, it's the same thing. It might be as simple as, you haven't chopped your straw. If you had straw in your cow's diet, you haven't chopped your straw short enough, or you haven't chopped your hay short enough. And so they're going to sort it out and either eat too much of something or eat too little of something. And you can almost immediately tell in the milk pounds that the cows are giving that, oops, you know, I didn't do something right. And that's stressing out her body, even though she's, you know, happy as a clam. We're stressing out a different part of her body, not her mind. And so it matters a lot. In Minnesota, generally speaking, this is a rough average, because every farm's different depending on the land they have and where they are and what they might have available. But generally speaking, about 45% of their diet is going to be corn silage, and that's the entire stalk of corn chopped into really little bits. And the day you're making corn silage, which is usually in late August or early September, how you chop it through that, it looks kind of like a combine, but it's called a forage harvester. The day you chop it and how finely you chop that has a huge implication on what your cows are going to eat over the next 12 months, and thus what they're going to produce over the next 12 months. We're talking a difference of inches, and most farmers and harvesters have figured out, you know, what that range is that works for them. But you hear once in a while of, oh shoot, we had the wrong guy in the harvester, and that's going to cost us for the next year. Hay is another 45%. So usually alfalfa or grass, or a mixture of the two. And that similarly, based on how wet you either bale it or pile it, you have usually 3, 4, or 5 chances at that. So you have a few more options. But how you harvest that on those days, again, will determine how your cows eat well or not for the next few months. So really, really, really important getting that done correctly. And then the last 10 to 15% is a kind of mineral, vitamin, and grain mixture with soybean meal, corn, and then all the vitamins and minerals cows need to, depending on where they are in life, be pregnant or produce milk, or a combination of both. And that usually comes from a feed mill, or some farms will even have that mill right on site. And again, that is a difference of, in some cases, microns for some of those essential minerals, which I think your audience will understand way more than I do. Some of those trace minerals, leaving something out or adding too much of something by mistake can cause huge, huge, huge implications and problems for your animals. Usually not, when I say huge, I mean, the problem is you've just bought a bin full of that and you're expecting to feed that for the next month. And so 5 pounds difference per cow makes a huge difference, and that can happen. But they would normally, you know, bounce right back after you replace the feed the next month the right mixture. So all these, it's probably very, very similar to your world. I mean, everything in moderation is kind of the human mantra that I hear today. But in our world, it's pretty much how precise and how accurate can we get it. And unlike humans, cows do not want variety. That stresses them out. They want things the same. So as you're transitioning from one corn silage crop to another, or one hay crop to another, anything you can do to blend them or make them as similar as possible really provides the cows less stress. And then hopefully, of course, they're taken care of, and you as a farmer are taken care of.
That makes, I kind of feel like us humans should probably eat the same as cows too. We should probably eat the same thing all the time to put less stress on our bodies. We'd probably do better.
Well, I'm sitting at my computer here and I've got a jar of Hershey's Kisses. So are you, as a dietitian, nutritionist, recommending if I eat 2 of these today, I should have the same every day? I'm all for that. You just tell me what to do.
If 2 of those a day is, if you can just eat 2, that's amazing. I would say go for it.
Okay, good.
Most people would probably eat 10 to 15. So if you 2 a day, I think if you enjoy it, that's completely reasonable.
See, yeah, it's just like cows. It's make sure that it's good enough to eat, but make sure we have all the essential stuff they actually need in there too.
Absolutely. Well, and I think I love the fact that you're making it relatable to as humans eat and how we eat. And it's interesting how animals can take on the same stress that our bodies take on when we eat things that we shouldn't. So I like that message. It's a good dietitian message.
Well, and it also relates back to the question you asked earlier about questions we get a lot. So there's also been another rumor spread quite heavily that cows are made to eat grass, and I would agree with that to an extent. But then the second part of that rumor is cows shouldn't eat corn, and I think people don't realize that corn is a grass, and it's just a grass that forms grain at the end of its life, as all grasses do. And so we have a mixture of that grain and grass. And I guess the most important thing is we have, trained nutritionists that have at least a bachelor's, if not master's and PhD, working on and figuring out this stuff. So I can't say I'm an expert in cow nutrition, but I can say I listen, and we as farmers listen to a lot of experts in cow nutrition. And you don't have to feed our diet. You sure can feed grass. I know there's some farms that feed grass only. There's, I'm meaning pasture only, and then just grass hay. There are a whole set of other, troubles and challenges that you have come with that. But that if you can overcome them, that's just fine. So cows get used to, we always say cows eat really what's ever put in front of them, which is why they can get sick if you as a farmer screw up. So I'm not saying our way of feeding is the only way and the right way, but there's just other challenges that come with it. If you would change to something totally different than the normal, what I would call Midwest diet. In New Zealand, there'd be a lot more grass only with little grain in the parlor. And that's just different. And they have different challenges or different vitamins and minerals or different things they need to do to make sure a cow who is both pregnant and producing milk stays healthy.
And I think that's ultimately, when it comes down to it, comes back to stress. Like, you just don't want to stress out your animals. So that includes food. That's a big part of their life.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I get really stressed out when dinner's an hour late. So cows, timing of food, and what's in it. That's kind of what my life revolves around, fortunately or unfortunately, is how good my meals are each day. But cows, yes, are the exact same way.
And speaking of food, when we talk about food and when we talk about just that's kind of what your role is. And you're there to just support your farmers, and you're there to supply, information that's sound for consumers and for professionals like dietitians. And I think you're always available to answer questions for people that, especially dietitians who might have professional questions. Like we talked about the grain and talked about corn and eating, and also pus in the milk and that type of stuff. Are you available for questions from professionals?
Oh, absolutely. And I would provide my email right over the podcast here, but I have a really funky last name. So feel free to get in touch with Anne, and she can get in touch with me so that you don't have to try to write down my weird last name in my email.
Your weird
and
last
yeah, if I can't tackle it, we also have human dietitians on staff, which hopefully many of your listeners know at Midwest Dairy and our sister checkoff groups around the country. We do a ton of research on dairy. We do a ton of research in stores, trying to make sure we not only are making a good product, but also positioning it well and positioning it well in the diet for all of you guys. So yeah, whether it's me answering an on-the-farm question or all the way through the food chain when humans are eating it, please do reach out. And I think you, Anne, are a great resource to connect us.
Absolutely. And I will include your email in my show notes so anyone can go there as well. So I appreciate, wonderful. I think we could probably talk for days about all just the different things about farming, and maybe we'll have a part 2 at some point, but I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise in this area for sure.
Well, thanks so much. And for coming to visit my home farm along with other dietitians. Again, we had a tour, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. We had a tour at my parents' farm, and if that's something that interests you, please reach out. We'd love to connect people who are helping humans make decisions on food, learn more about their food. So if that's something your listeners want to do, please let us know. So thanks for taking the time to do that, and thanks for the invitation for this. Hopefully, I have a master's degree in animal science, and sometimes that probably kicks in a little too heavy, because I can get really, really excited about this stuff. So thanks for humoring me with all the science and my answers. And again, I'm happy to either talk about this stuff with anyone or send you in the right direction so that somebody who knows, if I don't, can help you.
Awesome. Well, I have a few fun questions for you. We always have to end with fun questions. Awesome. What is your favorite food?
Well, I'll be a little, I'll break my rule and be a little self-promotional, but my wife makes cheese here on our farm, and I had it last night, so that's why it's on top of my brain. But we have a whiskey washed Munster, and it is getting better and better. And so I like to eat that with chips. I don't have it for dinner every night, or not chips, excuse me, crackers. I don't have it for dinner every night, but once in a while that is dinner, and it's just excellent. But as far as normal food, I don't think there's much better than a filet mignon that's cooked medium rare with a little cheese on top. So that is those would be my two favorites.
And what is the name of your wife's creamery?
Oh, now I might get in trouble, but it's Redhead Creamery. It's she's doing a great job.
I like that. I haven't had that one, so I'll have to try that cheese. It sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be an obvious question, but what's your favorite beverage?
Favorite beverage? Well, I mean, we go through. No, it's my question is if I'm going to drop brand names or not. But the simple answer is we go through a ton of whole milk, and I found personally, and I know the science, or I think the science is changing on this, but personally, I grew up with whole milk on the farm, and we buy whole milk from the store, and it just, to me, is a lot more filling. So in school and college, I got used to 2% and skim milk, but then after my wife and I got married, we decided to try whole milk again. And we found we drink a lot less of it. I used to be able to easily down like 4 glasses of 2% or skim milk at a sitting. And with whole milk, it's so filling. And the other thing the reason I was debating on answering is I really like Fairlife, their whole milk and their 2% chocolate. So that's got the lactose taken out, or almost all the lactose taken out, and then is a little higher protein. And that I find even more filling and satisfying. So those are my two favorite drinks, especially if we keep it to dairy.
Focused.
Yep.
We did share a glass of wine at dinner. Did you have wine at dinner when we had dinner that time that we were together?
Yeah, I mean, with cheese, we have a little cheese shop on our farm. So it's really, really tough, but sometimes customers won't finish the whole bottle of wine because they'll just order a glass. So it's really, really tough at the end of the day. Sometimes my wife on a Saturday afternoon, she'll bring in like 6 bottles of wine, but they'll all only have 1 glass in it. And so we do the deed for all of you to keep prices down. We will drink wine with our cheese very often. So no, I do love a good wine, and I do love we've got a lot of great craft brews here in Minnesota, so I enjoy those as well.
What is your favorite color?
My favorite color? It's always just been blue. Not sure why, if it's the beautiful skies or just it's the easy answer, but blue is my favorite color.
Blue is your favorite color. What is your favorite scent or smell?
My favorite smell is the smell I get right now as the Vikings are encroaching their first ever Super Bowl win. So that's probably my favorite smell. I just love the taste in my mouth, and it's everything I've been hoping for since the day I was born. So that's probably my favorite smell. But it's coming. It's not here yet. The one I actually smell, there's nothing better than fresh cut hay. And if any of you want an opportunity to smell that, you should take it, because there's just no other smell like it.
I will agree with you about the hay. That is a great smell. I don't know.
Not the Vikings?
Not the Vikings. Well, I'm not a big football fan, but I totally support you on that. I'll keep it in my mind when it happens. I'll be thinking of you. Hopefully you'll get that win.
Well, thank you.
And then my last question for you today is, what brings you joy in life?
Oh, what really brings me joy is my family and spending time with them. Whether it's after a hard day of work, relaxing with, like I said, cheese and a glass of wine, or just, going bowling or playing with my kids. That's the most fun thing I do every day, and that I get to enjoy. So that's an easy one.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lucas. I appreciate you chatting with me today and all your knowledge, and have a great rest of your week.
Well, thank you. And yes, if you or any listeners of the Anne Elizabeth podcast want to contact or continue the conversation in any way, please let me know. Thanks so much.
Lucas's family has a beautiful farm, and it was great to be able to see how his whole family interacts and takes care of the farm all year round. The Sjostrom's truly love their animals. While we were touring, we learned about the new technology they are using on the farm, how they feed and milk their animals, as well as the different housing locations of the cows. We even got to tour the nursery and love on all the baby calves, which was very fun. Lucas's grandpa and brother were there along with his dad to take care of the animals that day. And it is truly a village that takes care of a farm. I really enjoyed my time with Lucas. I actually got to sit down and have dinner with him and get to know him a little bit more on a personal basis. And he is really a great person to reach out to if you ever have any questions about dairy farming. Just to confirm, I am also still eating Jolly Time kettle corn, healthy popcorn with rainbow sprinkles this whole month to celebrate my New Year's. If you want to learn more about Jolly Time, go on over to their website, jollytime.com. There's wonderful recipe ideas, and you can also get some great coupons. My website, AnneElizabethRD.com, is where you can read my latest weekly wisdom blog posts, where I share my current crazy adventures of food, workout music, playlist that's motivating me to get buff right now, a really delicious and real deal recipe, or what I love. You can also purchase my book and can find all my previous podcast show notes and links to things we talked about during all my conversations with these amazing people. I would love to connect with you on social media and can be easily found on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at AnneElizabethRD. Remember to be great always, find the joy in each day, and to start a conversation that truly matters.